Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session where we're going to be looking again at writing for publication, continuing with this session, but more than me presenting, this is also an opportunity for you to engage and come up with issues that you're struggling with, especially those who already started thinking about their own publication. So if you've started on the journey, this is your opportunity to then ask any questions, or if there are issues or places where you feel stuck, this is an opportunity and a session for you to do so. But I think for the first part of the presentation, I'll do some comments, or I'll focus on some issues that we didn't get the time to focus on the previous sessions on writing for publication, which I think are very critical as you're working on your own publication. And then following that, we'll open up for Q&A. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and stop my video as I do, so that we can focus on the presentation. Okay, so as I've indicated, we're continuing with our conversation around writing for publication. And then this is a blast session where we're focusing more on the issues that you might have. So I'll try and not present for too long. Hopefully you'll have some issues. The first thing that I wanted to start with from my side as a follow-up from the previous sessions is a question that one of the students had. And I just wanted to correct something. So this first slide is about a correction, right? A correction about an article submission requirements. There was a question around mini dissertations, whether if you are writing a mini dissertation, you have to submit a manuscript, an article for publication or not. So you'll see if you go to 2.6 of the M&D procedures, it indicates there under point A, the first part there, that a mini dissertation, no manuscript is required. So for those of you who are doing your master's perhaps by coursework, and then there's a requirement for a mini dissertation, please note that there is no manuscript required for you for publication. Having said that, however, you always want to encourage students to consider publishing their work. So while it may not be compulsory for you, it may not be a requirement, I would still like to encourage you to submit part of your work for publication. It will be good for you, especially if you are considering a route or a journey within academia. You've done all this work, so consider having it published. But in terms of the official requirements of the university, it's not a requirement. So my apologies that I was not sure about this earlier when I spoke to you. Also because, as I indicated, I do have a student doing a mini dissertation, and from the procedures and the requirements that we had received from the committee, it came across as if it is a requirement. So we have now found out that actually it is not, as indicated in the M&D procedures. So once again, as I always say, please make sure that you familiarize yourself with the M&D procedures and you know the M&D procedures, so that if we find ourselves in a position where we are uncertain, at least the procedures are there to assist us to clarify some of the issues that of concern. So we've spoken about what an article is, what it's about, what it aims to achieve, what you need to think about when writing an article. And we spent a bit of time also focusing on the abstract. So we said articles are usually between 4,000 to 6,000 or 8,000 words. Once again, it's very much dependent on the journal that you have chosen. So the author guidelines will assist you in this regard. So here is just an example of the length of each section. So if, for example, the article is what? Let's see, it's 4, 5, 5.5. So maybe let's say it's 6,000 words maximum, required by the journal, this is how you can think about structuring your article. So the abstract will be between 100 and 350 words. Again, here, the journals are very specific in terms of how many words the abstract should be. So that one will be clear for you, and you'll work according to those guidelines. However, when it comes to the body of the article, it's not specified. So here is a guideline on how you can think about how to structure your article. The introduction, you're introducing your reader here. So you can think along the lines of between 500 to 1,000 words to introduce your reader to the article and to the issue, the topic that you're going to be discussing. Where the bulk of the word count goes is to the body or on the body of the article. So here's where you're talking about methodology, the data that you collected, the results that you found, the analysis, the discussion. So all of that would go onto the body of your article, right? So a bit of the literature could be in the introduction, a bit of the literature, depending on the journal. Again, they might want a separate literature review aspect. It's not common, but it is there depending on the journal. So the 4,000 words would also cover the literature review as well. And then the conclusion. Your conclusion, again, is a summary. It's that paragraph, at the most 2 paragraphs, where you synthesize, where you put everything together. And again, remember, your conclusion has to always speak to your introduction. So it's not a repetition of everything, but it's where you're saying, this is where I began, this is what I've done, this is what I found, and this is what I'm concluding, and this is what I'm suggesting as a way forward. Okay, right, so I hope that's clear. And then maximizing your chances for success. Many of us, all of us actually, when we submit an article to a journal, we submit it because we would like to have it published, right? So what makes a good paper? And here it's important to think around what the reviewers, the reflections from the reviewers and editors looking for. Many editors sometimes share their thoughts around what makes a good paper. Some reviewers also, based on the feedback and having reviewed many, many papers, have some ideas on what a good paper should look like. So it's about originality, right? Originality, what's new about this subject? How are you bringing a new angle? How are you coming up with something we have not perhaps thought about? How are you closing a particular gap that's been there for a while? So what's new about this particular subject? The subject might not be a new one, but your approach to it should be novel, should be new, should be something different. And it could be the treatment that you're offering, depending on the kind of research that you're doing, or the results that you're bringing about. So these results are offering us something new that we have not thought about, or they're bringing a result that we've never had before, right? And then you publish that. So it's about originality. And then, of course, a good title. We spoke about the importance of the abstract, the importance of the title, and how with search engines, again, it's a miss or hit, right? You hit or you miss. So your title, is it capturing me? Is it really capturing the essence of what the work is about? Keywords and a well-written abstract. So these are the initial things that the editor would look at, or the reviewers would look at: the title, the keywords, the abstract. Like I said, you look at those before you even look at the whole paper. It should already give you a glimpse of what to expect in the paper. And then adherence to the editorial scope and the objectives of the journal. Importance of reading the guidelines. What is this journal about? What is its focus? What is it interested in? And make sure that when you submit your paper, it's aligned to the scope of the journal, right? Otherwise, it tells me as an editor or reviewer that you didn't even bother to check what the journal is about. You just submitted your paper. Already, that's a bad starting point, right? And then the relevance to an extension of existing knowledge. Internationality, is it only applicable in South Africa? Is it only applicable here in the global South? Is it having a global focus as well? So what is the relevance of the work? Who is your audience? And how does that come across in how you've written the paper? The methodology, are your conclusions valid and objective? Do you understand the kind of method that you have applied? Again, here, some people who are using consultants. A consultant is there to assist you, not to do the work for you. So it has to show that there is an understanding of the method that has been applied. And is that method even applicable or a relevant method for the kind of work that you're doing or the research question that you're doing? Evidence-based, is it evidence-based or is it just an opinion? Does it belong to the Mail and Guardian or does it belong to an academic journal? And then theoretical and practical implications, if that's the aim of the journal, if that's the aim of your paper. When I've read your paper, I need to say, so what? And your paper should be able to answer the so what for me. This and that and the other, I did this, I did that, and I found this, and this is what I'm saying. And I'm saying, so what? You're saying, right? So you're saying, so it's important for us to give attention to this, or it's important for us to start rethinking on this. So it's important for us to start doing things in this particular way, right? Apply things in this particular way. So the so what factor is also very important. Answer that for yourself as well as you write a paper. Can you answer that question based on what you have written? Your paper has to be clear. The structure, there has to be logical flow, the quality of writing. Does it tell a story? Does it narrate well, right? Does it communicate well to the reader? Do you jump from one idea to the next, where the next idea does not follow logically from the previous idea? So things such as these ones, that structural issues are also very important because it tells the editor or the reviewer whether you've really proofread, is there clumsiness here, or you've actually sat with your work and given it close attention to your work before you click the send button, right? So logical progression of the argument, as I've indicated, and of course your references. You don't want to cite dated sources. You want to show your reader that you are in conversation and you are aware of the current debates around that issue that you're interested in. And we publish. We submit with the hope of publication, but it happens. It happens that your paper gets rejected. And what do you do then? It happens that your paper comes back. There are revisions required. What do you do then? So if your paper is rejected, find out why it has been rejected. This assists you to know what you need to pay attention to. If it's not clearly stated in the letter that comes from the editor, make that bold move of writing to the editor and saying, my paper was rejected. I would like to improve. I would like to know why it was rejected so that I can know what to pay attention to improve it. Sometimes it could just be that you sent it to the wrong journal. That journal is not the home for your paper. Not necessarily that the content, the focus of the work is flawed, but it could just be that you sent it to a wrong place, right? So find out why it's been rejected. And then based on the reasons that have been given to you, sit and rework your paper. Yes, when you get rejected, you might feel deflated and sad and thinking, oh my goodness, my work was not good enough. It's okay. Take a day, take a few days, sit with that sadness, but then always come back to the paper. Come back to it and rework. You'll find that sometimes when you read the comments for the first time, they may seem harsh or they may seem like, oh my goodness, I was not saying anything here. But when you come back, or you may find that you're thinking, yo, this reviewer is really attacking me and just tearing my paper apart. But when you've maybe put it aside for a few days or so, when you come back to it and you look at the reviewer's comments again, you might find that, oh, okay, actually, they're making a valid point here. I could elaborate on this. I could rephrase this. I could actually structure it differently. It's always, if you look at reviewing as something that is meant to strengthen your paper, that's meant to assist you to have your paper as good as it can be, then you will move from personalizing it, taking it personal, and then looking at it as a process that assists you to be able to put your best foot forward, your best work out there that others can read and actually saying, this person is making sense. It's about making sure that when your work goes out there, it's work that is of good quality for other people to engage with, right? And then if maybe it's rejected, you say, okay, it's rejected, sit with it again, and then look for another journal, and then submit it to another journal. Sometimes this journal may reject your paper. When you submit it to the second journal, they consider your paper. It is possible. So always have various options in mind, right? And don't sit for 6 months, for 9 months, because then the interest and the focus, you lose that, but also the work can become dated as well. Other people are always also doing research. When you get feedback, like I said, you can sit with it for a while, but don't sit with it for too long. Try and make sure that you resubmit the work as soon as possible, right? And like I said, rejection, yes, it does happen, and you will come across rejection as you submit your papers, but that's okay. That's not the end of the world. If you are asked for revision, even if it's major revision, you open your article and you just see red everywhere, track changes everywhere, or the reviewer's comments are 2 pages long, and you're thinking, so many comments, where am I going to even start? Just say, you know what? It was not rejected. They see potential in what I've written. And because they see potential, they've given me feedback to strengthen, to attend, to revise, to change certain things, to elaborate so that it can be considered, right? So celebrate when you get a revision, whether it's major revision, minor revision, celebrate. It's a good thing. Revision is a positive outcome, believe me. Revision means the journal is interested. It means they're interested in looking at your work again and again. And then address all the reviewers' concerns. What is it that they raise? Look at all of them. Look at what you can attend to maybe easily, and others require you to apply your mind further, read more, consult maybe some of the things that they've suggested, but address all the concerns. And you'll see when journals ask you to do revisions on a paper, they ask you to also, when you resubmit, submit the reviewer's comments and your responses indicating how you have attended to each and every point. So if there are 15 reviewer comments, then you need to have 15 comments saying, this is how I've attended to this, to that, to that, to that. Even where maybe you disagree with what they say, indicate that here, I would like to keep it as is because I have done this and I've done it this way, and this is the reason why I'd like to keep it this way. Provide your own argument. Provide your own argument so that the editor can have a look and say, oh, okay, maybe when I read it, I did not have that in mind. Now that you're explaining it and you're indicating why you've applied it this way, okay, that makes sense, right? As I've indicated again, don't take it personally. So it's not about you or attacking you as the person. Of course, when we write something, we put ourselves into what we're writing. And when we get feedback, it's almost as if the feedback is directed at us, you know, but try and understand that it's about the work and the quality of the work and trying to get it as good as it can be so that it can be published. And then responding to the reviewers, I've already alluded to this, I think, a little bit. You would get an email or a letter from the editor with their decision. So they'll get the reviewer comments, whether 2 or 3 reviewers, and then based on what the reviewers have said, they can say, okay, these are too substantive. It won't take 3 months or 6 weeks for the person to respond to this. So maybe it can be a rejection because we don't have time and space as the journal. We have to be very strict in terms of what we accept. This one requires too much work. We're going to then make a final decision or executive editorial decision to say we're rejecting it, right? So they will send that back to you with the copies of the reviewers' comments. And then here are some of the things that you can expect in terms of feedback. You can accept without any revisions or minor typos. And as I say here, very, very rare, where you get feedback from the editors and reviewers saying, I'm happy with everything in this paper. Not that it's impossible. It is possible, but it's very, very rare. Okay. So often number 2 and number 3 would be what you would get. Accept with minor revisions. So respond to all of the referees' comments and pay particular attention to anything that the editor asks you to do. And then accept with major revisions, might be collecting more data, perhaps substantial rewriting, will almost certainly be sent back to the original referees or reviewers to be reviewed again, because the required revisions were so extensive that when they review it again, it's going to give them a sense whether you've attended and whether the feedback or the revisions have now assisted in making the paper strong to be considered for publication. And then the last one, rejection. Sometimes you're given suggestions as to other journals you might try, as I said. And if they do that, go for it. Editors usually know other journals as well, and they might read your paper as they receive it and think, this might actually fit better in that journal or that journal. And when they respond to you, they'll tell you that consider sending it to this or that journal. And already that's a good thing. You don't have to go looking for another journal. They would suggest because they've seen what you've written and they know that it might actually maybe fit better there in that other journal. Don't abandon the goal of getting published somewhere else, okay? Always look at the feedback as a way to improve your work. And then how do we work with reviews and revision? When we get those, how do we attend to those? How we give attention to them? And what do they look like? What are some of the reasons that make our papers be rejected? What are some of the reasons that make our papers not be considered by the journals? And here I'm offering some suggestions or some comments from one of the leading journal editors, right? And so these are people who work with submissions all the time. And so they know what it is that we as authors always make mistakes on. So when you're dealing with the feedback from the reviewers, and also why articles get rejected. So if you know why articles get rejected, then you know as you work on your own article that, okay, these are some of the things that I need to avoid. These are some of the things that I need to make sure I attend to as I work on my own article. Lack of clarity. What is this paper even about? So if I read this as a reviewer or an editor, and it's not clear immediately to me what your work is about, that's already a red flag, right? Because you need to be able to articulate your arguments in a way that the reader gets and understand what it is that you are doing, what the focus of your work is. What is the contribution that this article is making? Is that clear? Is it there? If it's not clear in the paper that this is what you're aiming to achieve, what you're aiming to contribute, then why should I consider your paper, right? If it's not contextualized thoroughly, also, that is problematic. So where are you basing this work? What is the context of the work? Context in terms of space, place, context in terms of the location, context in terms of the focus of what you're doing and how you're limiting it. So how do you contextualize the work that you're doing? Not clear, chances are maybe you might get major revision to say it's not clear what it is, the context of the work is. So please try and make it clear so that the reader can get it. So it might not necessarily get rejected, that you might be asked to do a major revision. And then too much information. You need to be able to balance. One of the first slides that I showed was for you to think about how to structure your article. How much should you say in the introduction? How much should you say in the conclusion? How much should you say in the body? If you're going to have a conclusion that's 5 pages long, then you don't leave yourself time to actually engage with what the results were about, the process of doing the research, what it is that you found. But also, you don't want to write a paper that is 10,000 words when the journal clearly indicated that it must be 6,000 words maximum. So it's important also. And then poorly formatted, again, please, you don't want to come across as being sloppy in terms of how you do your work. Follow the journal author guidelines. Don't use Harvard referencing if the journal requires Chicago referencing. So the formatting is very, very important as well. No logical flow of arguments. I've already indicated you cannot move from one point and move to another point all in one paragraph. Your paragraph should have an idea. What is the idea? What is the issue that you are bringing into the conversation now? And then you see that idea throughout the whole paragraph, right? And it could be throughout, again, the whole section. So, and this is why we've got headings. They serve a purpose. If you have a particular heading, all the paragraphs under that heading have to speak to that subheading. Much as the title of your article, everything that's inside that article has to relate to and speak to the title of your article. So the same again with the headings and the subheadings in the body of your article. There has to be that logical flow. Okay? Don't submit shoddy work. It shows some disrespect also. And you might send because you're in a rush and hoping that maybe the flaws won't be noticed. Believe me, the flaws will be noticed. And if they are noticed, then it's not a good, image for you as a writer, as a scholar. Don't just submit for the sake of submitting. Don't submit because UNISA says, all the students have to submit articles for publication. And you put something together and say, okay, as long as I've submitted something and get a letter from the editor saying, thank you for the submission to your journal, it will be considered and you'll get feedback. And then you just put that together and submit and say, okay, I've submitted something, here's proof. No. Don't say you've got nothing to lose. You always have something to lose. You submit shoddy work, that's your name on that paper. It's your name. And in future, you might want to submit again to that same journal and your name might be flagged and you don't want that, especially, well, anytime really, but more so when you are still an emerging researcher, emerging scholar, you don't plagiarize, you don't submit shoddy work. You don't say, okay, I'll just see what the feedback says and I'll work with the feedback. Let me just submit something. No, submit good work. Don't just submit something. Articles get rejected because they may not be appropriate for the particular journal. Again, I repeat this, I think, for the 10th time now. Make sure that you familiarize yourself with the journal guidelines. When you have done that, then the chances of you submitting a journal that's not appropriate for that journal would be minimal, okay? The method is unsound. So the body of your article is around the method, the processes you follow, the procedures, the results, how you've analyzed. So the method is very important. So if your method is unsound, then it means your paper is really, really flawed. And that may lead to your paper being outright rejected. And again, linked to this, statistical analysis problems. Make sure that when you run your statistical analysis, everything is in place. Make sure that your analysis is proper. Make sure that your results and the analysis are based on the actual statistics and the results that you got from the statistics. Again, interpretive errors. You have your results. How do you interpret the results? Do you know how to interpret the results? you use a consultant to run a statistical analysis for you, but you still, as an author, as a writer, have to make sense of those statistics. And if you interpret incorrectly because you don't understand how the stats work or function or what particular results mean, then there might be errors. There again, that's the whole core of your work out the window. Okay, so if your work is poorly written, if there's poor grammar, too many spelling mistakes that are unnecessary, there are so many programs now that we can use to assist us with ensuring good grammar, right? So even if you don't have money for a professional language editor, there are programs and software that you can use to assist you to be able to ensure that you proofread your work. Okay, that is very, very important. And then, how long does my paper take before it gets published? If I publish in January, should I expect that by June it will be published? Should I expect that by March it will be published? When? How long, right? So the timeline is also very important. And you also need to have realistic expectations also when it comes to this. It's very, very critical. There are many different forms of review. There's editor review. The editor has a look at the work and immediately makes a desktop decision or not. So that might take a shorter period. If they send out for review, of course, it's going to take longer. There's open review also, where the reviewers' names are revealed, where you know who the reviewers are, where maybe people are invited to submit papers, and then those who've submitted papers also act as reviewers for other papers that have been submitted for that issue. And then there it can be open review, right? And then we also have double-blind peer review. And this double-blind peer review is the one that we always go for, especially when it comes to issues of subsidy and also accredited journals by DHET. Double blind, because then it means there aren't any issues of being worried that, oh, if the person knows that it's me who reviewed their work, they might not like me if I say things that are negative, or what will happen now with the scholarly friendships. This is someone who is also my peer. What happens? So double-blind peer review assists with that, right? It assists with that because you're not going to know that it is me who reviewed your work. And therefore, it assists with me really being open and honest about my reflections and the thoughts and the feedback that I would like to give to the paper. All right. And I think this is partly one of the reasons why when it comes to accredited journals, these are the ones that would be considered for subsidy as well. Right. It's because of the rigorousness and thoroughness and avoiding possible conflict of interest when it comes to reviewing. The editors do an initial read to determine if the subject matter and research is appropriate for the journal. As I said, that can take approximately 1 week. So you submit your paper today, by Friday or early next week, you have feedback from the editor saying, consider another journal. I've had a look and I can immediately see the structural issues. I've identified 1, 2, 3, and 4. Please attend to these things and then resubmit if you want. Or I've identified these things and I've seen that it's not a good fit for our journal. Please consider sending somewhere else. So that's usually quick. And it's good because then you have time to consider that another journal. You have time to sit and work on the journal article. So for the requirement for the exam, again, it's good for you because at least within a week or so, you have feedback. And if there's work that needs to be done before it can be considered by the journal to go out for review, you still have time. So you don't get your time wasted before you can be able to submit your work for examination, right? And the editors usually identify 2 reviewers, right? And this will happen, and they will give the reviewers about a week to respond, not to review your work. Please understand. not to review your work. They will give them approximately 1 week to indicate whether they are available to review your work or not. So they're given an opportunity to say, okay, I decline this invitation to review, or I accept this invitation to review, or I'm unable to review at this time, so I'm unavailable, right? So they're given about 7 days to do this, after which then the review process starts. Of course, some reviewers, within a day or two, they would have responded. And it's wonderful, especially if they respond positively saying, I'm available to review. Because as soon as they say that, then the paper becomes available to them, especially for those that get submitted online. As soon as the identified reviewer clicks, I'm available to review, then immediately the system makes the paper available to them. Then they have access to the paper to sit with it to review. And then they're given time to be able to review, which is between 6 to 8 weeks. So it's about 1.5 to 2 months for them to review the papers. Some reviewers really, within a week or so, they have feedback. But unfortunately, it can be one reviewer, not both of them. So there still has to be this waiting period for the second reviewer. So if I'm an editor, I get feedback from one reviewer, I have to sit with it until the other one sends their review as well. And then only then would I look at both of them and then consolidate and then decide what final decision would be made based on these two reviews. They can be complementary or they can be very divergent. And so as the editor, you then need to sit in the middle of this and decide how to put all of that together to provide feedback to you as the author. So you review those, it takes about 2 weeks. So you'll see there's that 1 week and another week, right? Where the editor decides, responds to you, identifies reviewers, 2 weeks to sit with the recommendations and comments from reviewers, 8 weeks for the reviewer comments. So in an ideal world, we're talking about at least a minimum of 3 months, right? And this is when things have gone according to plan, which hardly ever happens. There are some journals, and once in a while that happens, that you submit in February, and by June, July, your paper has been accepted and is now going through proofreading and all of that by the journal. So if things are ideal, you can say, okay, maximum 8 weeks, 2 weeks here, and a week there, and a week there. So that gives you 9 weeks, right? So it can be what? Yes, 4, 8, 9 weeks here. And then expected time from submission to review feedback, as I said, 3 to 3.5 months. And this is you getting your feedback, not your paper getting published. So it might take that 3 months for them to come back with major reviews. They come back with major reviews and say, okay, we give you another 3 months to really sit and go read again and go synthesize and go do this, and then resubmit your paper with the revisions. So that's already 6 months. 3 months for you to get feedback. After the feedback, it's revisions required or major revisions, or these revisions come at a time when you are busy with other things, other tasks, so you can't do it immediately. And then you put it aside for 2 weeks or a month. So that's already another month added. And then you start working on this and you realize, oh my gosh, it requires a lot of work. So you sit with the work and then you resubmit. So you find that it's going to be another 3 weeks. So it's 6 months. And then if it's major revision, it means it has to go back to the reviewers again and the cycle starts. Hopefully they'll take shorter periods, but not necessarily. So we're already looking into 9 months. So to be really on the realistic side, just tell yourself that it's going to take about 9 months to a year for my paper to be published. But like I've indicated, if maybe it comes back and the revisions are minor, so after these 3 months, it goes back to you and the revisions are minor and you decide to put everything aside and work on the revisions, within 2 weeks or so, you've worked on the revisions to send it back to the editor. And often when the revisions are minor, then it's the editor's decision to look at the revisions you've done and then make a decision saying, okay, I'm happy with this or not. Or they can come back and say, there are these two little things that still need to require you to maybe give attention to. You do that, you send back. In that case, yes, 4 to 6 months or so, your paper can be published. But to be realistic, just say, okay, it's going to take between 6 months to a year. It's going to take 9 months to a year. Of course, it can take shorter. Again, it depends on the journal that you're submitting to. It depends on the frequency of the journal in terms of how many issues they have per year. So all of those things also determine how long your paper is going to be to take before it can be published, right? And then again, receiving that feedback, how do you deal with it, right? As I've indicated, a request for revision is really good. It means we see something here, right? You are now in the publishing cycle. It means this paper that you submitted actually has the potential to be published out there, right? All of us, as I've said, we have our papers revised all the time. If I publish 4 papers a year, be rest assured, all those 4 papers, there's been revisions requested by the editors. So it's okay. It's part of the journey, and it's always about strengthening the work that you have. So don't panic and say, oh my goodness, right? See it as a positive thing if you've been asked to revise. Even if the comments are sharp or discouraging, as I've indicated, work on it. If your paper is rejected, don't give up. We've all had our papers rejected at least once in our lifetime. In this journey in scholarship, we've had our papers rejected. I dare a scholar who said, I've been a scholar for the past 5, 10, 20 years. I've never had a paper rejected. I'm yet to see one. I actually think, sometimes we should write reflective papers and actually write about our experiences so that others who come can also read about these experiences so that they get to understand. Because you meet someone, they've already have 50 publications and you're thinking, oh my goodness, how is that even possible? It's been a long journey. So as you start, please don't feel overwhelmed by it all, right? If it's been rejected, as I said, ask why, listen to what they say, listen to that feedback, use that feedback to improve. Try again. If it gets rejected again, keep trying. Never, never lose hope, okay? When you get feedback, acknowledge the editor and set a revision deadline for yourself, but also look at the deadline that they give you. Some journals don't give you a deadline. They say it's up to you. Whenever you're ready to resubmit, you can resubmit. So that will also determine when your paper will be published. The longer you take, then it means it's going to go into the next issue or the issue after the next one. So also think about those timelines as well. Some editors will say, please work on your revisions because ideally we would like to consider your paper for the article that for the issue that's coming up in October, or for the issue that's coming up in February. So if you work on your revisions, then there's potential for your work to be part of that issue that's going to come out in February. And then that's actually good because you have something quite concrete that you're working towards, right? So look at the revision deadline and work with that. If in doubt, if something is not clear, engage with the editor. That's what they're there for. If you don't understand a comment, don't just sit with it and feel stuck. Go back and ask, right? If you're writing with people, it's even better because then you can have a conversation with those you're writing with to check their understanding, to discuss the feedback, and then work on it. Meet that deadline. If they've given you a deadline, meet that deadline, because the deadline is almost always linked to a particular issue that they're considering your paper for, right? Make sure that you meet that deadline. And then attach a covering letter, as I've indicated, indicating how you've attended to all the comments point by point. And here's just an example of agreeing with the reviewer's comments. So how you might structure your work as well, right? So you're writing back to the editor, acknowledging and thanking them for the time they took, because it really takes a lot of time. And many of the all of them actually. I think I only know of one scholarly publishing house that actually gives a stipend or money to reviewers, but it's actually academic citizenship. I get an email requesting me to review a paper, and I have to take time out of my schedule to review that paper. So it really is something for you as the author to actually acknowledge and thank the editor and the reviewer. So here's an example of how you can do that. Let us open by thanking the 2 reviewers for the insightful comments. They gave us clear guidance and some positive critiques. Following their suggestions, we spent more time reading and came to the revision process better prepared, right? We enjoyed the process and think that the reviewers' comments have tremendously affected the revised draft. Both reviewers should now clearly see the difference they made to the revised manuscript. In the following lines, we detail the changes in line with the reviewer's comments, right? So now you're saying, this is how I've attended to this one's comment, to that one's comment, to that one's comment. Again, to reviewer 1, we'd like to express our appreciation for your extremely thoughtful suggestions. As you will see, we've revised and improved the paper based on your valuable feedback. You highlighted that we'd not spend enough time discussing the implications of our arguments for current understanding of Drucker's work. We agree with your suggestion, and we've added 2 additional paragraphs, right? You show how you've done this. See that in page 30 and 31. And also a few comments within the paper. Look at page 11. We devoted to outlining the implications of our analysis. We've kept our discussion brief to ensure we maintain the commitment to the appropriate page and word length. But what we do outline should make clear what this perspective on Drucker's makes relevant for management practitioners and scholars alike. So what I like about what they did here is that we attended to what you said, but we didn't go too much in detail because we're also aware that the paper, maybe the journal requires 6,000 words in terms of word count, and they've now asked you to add more. And what do you now do? Because maybe your paper is already 5,800 words. So you can say, okay, I've only added 1 paragraph or a few lines along this to attend to that, depending on how much. Maybe you've written, but they said you could elaborate more. Then you can elaborate in a few words, maybe draw from other people as well. So, but then you show that you've attended to what they've asked of you. So reviewers like that because they see that you've engaged with their work, okay? In order to give yourself the best possible chance of having your revised manuscript accepted, make sure that you send it with an additional letter to the editor, again, how you've made the changes, right? And if you haven't anyway, then attended to 1 or 2 things why you haven't made a specific change also, and provide that reasonable rationale. You know, your argument, what is your argument for not doing this? So it's good to highlight the referee's comments and show how you've responded to them. So in an overall letter to the editor themselves, then the editor can quickly see, right? I'm sending you 3 copies of my amended manuscript, plus an electronic copy. I've also enclosed a separate sheet detailing our responses to referees. As you'll see, we've paid particular attention to what they indicated, their suggestions, which we found very helpful. Please pass on our appreciation to the reviewers. I hope this amended manuscript will now be suitable for publication, and I look forward to hearing from you. That's what you say, right? That's all you say. And then the last thing before I pause and then we can have a discussion is the issues around ethics in writing. This is very, very important. It's not only applicable now as you're writing your master's or doctoral dissertation and thesis, but also even when you're writing an article, you'll see, again, depending on the journal that you choose, some journals actually require that when you submit your article, you must also include the ethical clearance as well, because they want to be sure that you've adhered to the ethical principles. But also, some journals actually run their own plagiarism test. So they have their own Turnitin or something like Turnitin. So they actually subject your work to that plagiarism software, and then they can come back to you with feedback on that. So some journals are quite strict on this, hey? So if you say something, support what you're saying. Don't make things up and think that they will read and not know or not find out. Please note that when your work is sent out to reviewers, those reviewers are experts in your field. Those reviewers are experts in the particular topic that you've written about. So I would not be sent a paper to review if it's not something that's aligned to my own research. So if it's aligned to my own research, chances are, or it should be, that I'm aware and familiar with debates in my field. So if you say something that has been made up, I should be able to pick it up as a reviewer, or chances are I will be able to pick it up as a reviewer. And that's not going to work well for you. Okay? Do not publish the same findings. We've had this conversation before. Do not publish the same findings. You might be wanting multiple outputs from the same thesis or dissertation, but make sure that the focus is always different, right? You decide that you're going to take your literature, have a paper out of it. You're going to take the actual body, the content, the empirical work, have a paper on it. You might want to write a paper on a methodology piece. So there should be a different focus and different lens that you take for each and every paper that you're writing. Don't publish the same findings. It again speaks to that issue of originality. If you're writing from the same data, the focus should be different. So you've written a paper drawing from this data, but you are focusing on this particular issue. But you find that this data is very rich and there are other things that are coming out from that data. And you want to also highlight that when you write another paper, then you make sure that the focus is different. And this will also be supported by also literature. You will draw from different kind of literature that speaks to, that supports, that engages the focus of that particular paper. And of course, referencing is very important. You use somebody's words, acknowledge them, right? If somebody uses your words, you would want them to acknowledge you as well. And avoid excessive use of others' words. Your paper should not be full of quotations in every page, every paragraph, everywhere there are quotations. No, then we don't hear your voice. Then we don't hear your contribution. Then it moves away from originality because now you're just regurgitating what other people have said. So avoid excessive use of others' words. Nothing wrong with using references. It's important because you have to be in conversation with other scholars. Nothing wrong with direct quotations if it's really something that you think is adding value and depth to the work that you're doing. It's a powerful quote that really speaks to the work that you're doing. Nothing wrong with that. So always just have a reason. Why are you putting that direct quote? Don't do it because you don't know how to paraphrase it. Don't do it because you want to make sure that you don't plagiarize. So you're just going to put it as is and put inverted commas and just put page numbers. No, that should not be the reason. It has to be clear. There has to be a reason why you are drawing from a direct quotation. And that's why you cannot just have a quotation and then move on with your arguments on other things. So you need to also speak to that quotation. So there always has to be a link to why you're using something, right? If conflict of interest or acknowledging the funders, people who supported in the work that you're doing, make sure that you acknowledge them, make sure that you acknowledge your funders, make sure that if there's conflict of interest, you also indicate that as well. And then lastly, I just want to say to all of us, almost all good writing begins with terrible first efforts. You need to start somewhere, right? And as I say, be gentle with yourself. It's okay. We all have that terrible first effort. We all have that draft where when you revisit, you're like, my goodness, what was I thinking? I'm not even making sense. So it's okay. Sometimes you have that good draft that you believe is good and you submit and then it comes back with all that feedback. And that's also okay, right? We start somewhere. And the important thing in all of this is that you start. right? Because it's only when you start that you can finish. It's only when you start that you can get from point A to point B. But if you don't even start at all, then where will you get to? And we thank Anne Lamott for this. Okay, so this then brings us to the end of the thoughts that I wanted to share with you today. And please, as we go into question and answer session now, note that it does not have to only be limited to what I've just shared with you today. So it can be also linked to the previous sessions that we had on writing for publication. Something that was unclear, that you were stuck in, that you wanted to follow up on, that is sitting with you. Maybe you've already started identifying journals, you are uncertain about certain things. So if there are any of those issues, the rest of the session now will be dedicated to that, if you have any questions. At the moment, I'm not seeing any questions at all, so we'll just give it a minute. And also, as I've indicated, it does not have to be based on today's presentation only. It could also be linked to the previous sessions that we had, the 2 sessions on writing for publication. Okay, I'll just give it a minute. No questions tonight. Wow. Okay. Okay. There is now one question. Please explain the point about using same data for different foci. Okay, so what I was talking about there was that you cannot use the same data to write 2 or 3 articles. So let's say you have collected your data, you have run your experiments, you've done the survey, and now you have come up with a number of themes, right? And after putting together these themes, you discuss them, you analyze them, and you have a lot of data, right, that is supporting these themes that you've come up with in the work that you're doing. So what's important is, okay, there's a limit in terms of the number of words that can go into an article. Think about your discussion chapter or your results chapter or your methodology chapter, and you sit with that and then you say, okay, this theme focuses specifically on this particular idea or particular issue, and I can actually expand on this and elaborate on it. In your thesis, you have the space to do that. And you can then decide that if I want to go and write a journal article on this, how am I going to decide on which themes to focus on? So you've written a chapter and you've got 5 themes. And you can decide that, okay, for this paper, I'm going to only focus on these 2 themes, right? And then engage these 2 themes and actually work on a paper focusing on these themes. What are these themes about? What are they telling me? And then as you engage with them, what is the literature saying? And then this also means you're going to go and consult more literature, engaging on these particular issues, and then you actually write a paper focusing on those 2 themes. And then you say, I still have other themes that I didn't give attention to. And then when you do that, then you can have another paper focusing on these other 3 themes. And then again, the focus is very different. You collect, you contact literature and you engage with literature, you focus on that, right? So that's what you can do in terms of using different foci for the same research that you've done, but then looking at it from different directions, writing different papers from it. Sometimes it can be easier depending on how you approached your work. If maybe you used mixed methods, that again can be easier for you in terms of writing a paper. You can say, okay, I did a bit of quantitative and I did a bit of qualitative. So I'm going to write a paper just focusing on the data, on the qualitative aspect of my work. I'm going to write another paper just focusing on the quantitative aspect of my work. So you can do that. Or you can say, maybe you've done a focus group. But then in addition to the focus group, you also conducted individual interviews, right? And then you say, okay, I'm going to look at the focus groups and the data that emanated from the focus group, and then I'm going to use that only for this paper so that I look at maybe what are the perceptions, maybe use the discourse analysis and expand on that and work on a paper that's just looking at what happens when people are together, perceptions that differ, perceptions that are the same. What does this tell you about this phenomenon? But then you also go and say, I'm also interested in the experiences. So let me look at those interviews that I conducted, and then based on those interviews, what are the things that came out? So these are different ways in which you can write multiple papers based on the same work, right? And if maybe you just did qualitative study, you conducted interviews, or you just did focus groups, you can say, okay, for this paper, I'm going to focus on the data itself. But maybe for your work, you actually came up with a novel, interesting, unique way of collecting that data. It's a qualitative study, but maybe you used photo voice, for example. And then you say, okay, I want to speak and reflect on how it was for me using photo voice and the creative ways in which I've used photo voice. It exists, it's a method that's there, but maybe the way that you've used it is different from what other authors who have done or used photo voice have used it. Your way of using it maybe is different. And so you're writing a paper to now go through a reflection or different steps in which you used photo voice differently. And that on its own is a paper. Again, be directed by the journals that you want to approach. There are many methods journals. And if you do have a very interesting method that you've used in your research, by all means, I would love to encourage you to write a paper focusing on methods, and write an article just focusing on methods so that others can also draw from your method for their own research and say, oh, okay, I also want to use photo voice, but the way that Mukwena used it in their paper was very different or very interesting. I would like to follow or draw from the way that they did it so that I can do my work that way as well. And that's how knowledge is produced. Now that you're doing your work, when you get to the methods, you always say, I'll be drawing on so-and-so's phenomenological what, or I'm going to be drawing from so-and-so's design or focus. So other people can also say the same. They can also draw from your work and from the way that you've approached your work for their own work as well. And that's how we contribute to knowledge. I hope that answers your paper. And you're saying that it's difficult. Sorry, just want to charge. You're saying that it's I don't know if it's the same anonymous or somebody else. Your hurdle is writing a conceptual paper. The easiest question or answer that I can give you is go and check sample conceptual papers that are out there that are already published, and look at how others have conceptualized their concept papers. You need to say, what is this idea or this concept that I want to build on? What is this concept that I want to write about? And how do I want to build on this concept? And that's when you start reading. And you start thinking about various definitions or your definition on that concept, and then build on it. And that becomes quite useful and an interesting paper to write, because with a conceptual paper, you're not relying on the data, right? You're not relying on the data that you've collected, but you actually are now thinking critically about an issue. You're thinking critically about an idea, and then you're putting your thoughts and applying your mind to that idea, and you're building on it throughout the paper. So the whole 6,000 words of your article is based on building. Think about when you're building on an argument, right? And then you build on that argument throughout the paper, and you're expanding on it, and you're explaining to your reader, so that at the end I can say, or I can say, aha, I get it, right? Many of the scholars, if we look back, who've come up with concepts and theories, it came from curiosity and thinking about what's happening around them in society, and saying, how can I make sense of this? What can one call this phenomenon? What can one call what's going on? Right? So if you think of Frantz Fanon and his idea of lactification, right? And saying, the colonial project really messed us up. And it's really about saying, if you are a Black person, you're not good enough, you are a non-being, or you're subhuman. And what does that mean when now people are perceived as sub-being and belonging to the periphery, but everybody wants to be at the center, nobody wants to be at the periphery? And so what does that mean for you to now be recognized as a being, as a human being, right? You need to move closer, to the proximity of whiteness, of being white. And what does that mean? What does that entail? What does one have to do to give up, to take on, to be able to move towards that which is not attainable? Because the idea is that you will reach there where you want to, but you may not be able to. But then it requires you losing something of yourself to be able to reach that, right? So it requires symbolically, not for you to use, skin whitening creams, it's something else. But lactification, in terms, when you think about lactification, you think about milk, something white. So the process of becoming something, the process of moving from something, from blackness, which is seemed as bad, but for you to have a good life, to be accepted, to be okay, you need to go through this process of lactification, where now you are white or getting closer to whiteness, so that you are accepted, that you are deemed as a human. So this is the concept. This is how one comes to this. But it comes from you saying, what is the problem? What is going on? And what are the implications of going on? And what is it that we can then do, or what is it that we can put in place for us to be able to understand what this process is, for us to be able to give meaning to it? Because if maybe Fanon just explained the process and spoken about it, but not actually coined a concept that assists us to be able to say, oh, that's what that means, right? So writing a conceptual paper really requires you to apply a mind, or it could be a concept that already exists, sitting with this example of lactification, saying this is the concept, and when Fanon, in the heart of colonialism, was thinking about this, he came up with this concept, this idea. But here I am sitting in 2023, and I'm still curious and wanting to grapple with the idea of race, of racism, of what that means in the lives of people on an everyday basis. So how do I then write a paper grappling that engages with that, where you don't have to go out and ask people about the experiences of racism, about the experiences of being raised, about the experiences of being Black in the world, but saying, what does that mean? What does it mean to live in a world where it's dangerous for a Black boy to walk in the street? What are the implications of that? So Fanon spoke about electrification and what it means. How do I, or how can I apply that today? Or how can I make that relevant to this question that I have, and how can I build on that, right? So Fanon speaks about this process, but I speak about this particular process. I'm building on what Fanon has formulated, or I'm showing how Fanon's concept continues to be relevant today in how we are still engaging and dealing with the complexities of racism. Okay, so that's how you write a conceptual paper. That's how you build on a concept, on a concept, either coming up with something, building on something, or critiquing or engaging with a particular concept. Okay, so I hope that answers you, Anonymous. And of course, as I always say, if maybe I answer and it's still not clear, or you have a follow-up, please go ahead and type here, so that I can be able to continue responding if I can. Okay. Good evening, Abdi. Can I publish my article, the journal with... Can I publish my article, the journal within my university that I'm working in now? Or must it be journals where my supervisor guides me to publish? Okay, I'm going to assume that's what you are meaning. So, okay, Abdi, I'm going to assume that you are currently based at another university, but you are also a UNISA graduate student, right? So you're asking whether you can publish an article with the university where you're based. So let's say your university has got a publishing house, and there are possible journals there that you want to consider. And your question is whether that's okay, or whether you have to publish with the journals that your supervisor suggests or your supervisor guides you towards. Okay, so here is my answer. First, it's important that the journal is in the accredited list. So even if the journal is based at your university, wherever it is, just make sure that that journal is in the accredited list, because the only journals that are accepted, that are acknowledged by the university, and by extension serve as a requirement for students to publish their articles in, are the journals that are in the DHEAD list, okay? So first, make sure that the journal or the journals that you're considering are in the DHEAD list. It is not a must that you have to publish in journals that are here, maybe with our publishing house at UNISA, but do have a conversation with your supervisor. If you've identified a journal, ideally, you as the student have to identify a journal, because it's also part of the learning process the learning journey on how to identify a journal, making sure that you understand the journal guidelines, making sure that that journal is aligned and in line with the work that you are doing, that it will be a good home for the article that you want to publish. So have a conversation with your supervisor. Indicate to your supervisor that you've identified a journal. So first you will do the work of identifying that journal, making sure that the journal is in the DHET accredited list, and then have a conversation with your supervisor saying that I've identified this journal. I think it will be a good fit for my paper that I'm working on. And then your supervisor can then guide you and say, oh, okay, go for it or not. So the supervisor is there to guide you, but not to force you to publish in a particular journal. Obviously, the supervisor ideally would know of possible predatory journals or hijacked journals. So it's our duty as supervisors to guide you to ensure that you do not end up submitting an article in a hijacked or predatory journal. Okay, so that's the important thing where I think the supervisor is core. But by all means, as a student, you can check journals anywhere. Can be journals in the UK, can be journals in the US, can be journals in Ghana, can be journals in Ethiopia, can be journals in India. So it does not matter where the journal is, as long as that journal is in the lists that have been identified by the Department of Higher Education. So those journals are not only South African journals, please understand. Those journals are journals from around the world, right? They've just been accredited and recognized by DHET, and therefore the journals that we must publish in if we want our work to be recognized by UNISA and to also qualify for the subsidy for the university. Okay. And yes, Abdi, I see Dineo has already responded. The PowerPoint presentation is already available, if I'm correct, of the previous presentations, but then it will be available with today's presentation as well, because it's a continuation from the first session on writing for publication. So all the PowerPoint presentations will definitely be available, okay? And please go through them. And again, when we have future sessions, if you still have questions based on what you would have read on the PowerPoint presentations, you'll be more than welcome to then come back and ask questions. As the year is winding down, we're going to have sessions that are solely for you, where I'm not going to be, or my colleagues are not going to be presenting. Ideally, that's the plan, so that the sessions are for you to ask any questions that you have pertaining to your postgraduate journey. Okay, because these are also meant for you as the students to also have the opportunity to engage with us on any of the issues related to your M&D journey that you might be confronted with as you go along. All right. Hello, Simobile. I'd like to know, what can one do if the available literature is very old? There are no recent publications on the subject matter. Simobile. That's interesting. But it's not impossible, and it is possible, but very rare. But if you do find that there is no available literature, then you speak to that, you indicate that, because that also then means either people have been doing the work but not publishing it, which would be very strange. But it could also mean that not a lot of attention has been paid to that issue since 1980. So since 1980, there does not seem to have been any engagement or any attention paid to this particular issue. And as a result, your work, therefore, is going to contribute to the debates, is going to offer some insights on recent issues around that particular phenomenon. So it's okay. It's okay. Just really make sure that there is no available literature. So this means you would have checked all the different platforms online, the search engines online. It means you would have had a conversation with your subject librarian. And if after you've done all of this, have spoken to the subject librarian, have searched all the various search engines, and still there's nothing, then it means there's nothing. We cannot make things up, right? If there is nothing, then you explicitly indicate that in your writing. Because if you don't, the person who's going to be reading your work is going to immediately think, oh, you're using dated literature. Why don't you also refer to recent data as well, right? Sometimes when it comes to reports, you might find that the report that's available is the 2019 report. There was no report that was released in 2020, 2021, 2022, and you're writing about this issue now in 2023, and then you're referring us to a 2019 report. So, and you do indicate this is the most recent available report on this issue, the 2019 report. There hasn't been any reports, right? So you indicate that there hasn't been any literature or work that seem to have been conducted on this particular issue since 1980. And therefore, you've identified this gap, and therefore your work is going to provide an invaluable contribution because it's going to add and provide more updated, more recent, more up-to-date engagement on that particular issue. Okay, so if no available literature, then you provide us with that recent literature through the work that you're doing, Sibobile. So it's a challenge to you, I guess, in many ways. I get upset when journals ask me to review their work, but when I submit my work, they reject. It feels like I'm trusted to review their work, but not to publish with them. Anonymous, I understand your frustration, but please don't look at it as a I don't know, a tit for tat kind of situation. I can totally understand your frustration. You review their work, so they trust that you have the know-how and you have the skills and good enough as a reviewer, and they trust the feedback that you provide to give back to other authors to improve or to publish their work. However, when you submit, your work does not get published. This is a complex one, right? And I don't have a clear answer for you, but only to state that, remember, the process is not that straightforward. It's not that easy because it's not the editor who decides, unless if you're telling me that you are getting desk rejections, right? Because then that would be something totally different. And if you are getting desk rejections, then I'm going to ask, have you had a conversation with that journal or those journals? Have you had a conversation with the editors and speak to them about this? Because I would suggest that you do, so that you understand where and what exactly is the issue. If it's a desk rejection, then it means it's the editor and maybe associate editors that are rejecting your work, right? And then, and from that standpoint, I can understand your frustration because yes, maybe to some extent, it doesn't make sense somehow. But also when they've rejected your work, have they given you reasons? Have you asked why? However, on the other hand, if you've submitted your paper and it was sent out for review and then it gets rejected on the basis of what the reviewers have said, then in that case, the journal cannot be blamed, right? Because the journal relies on us as reviewers based everywhere. I'm based at UNISA, somebody is based at the University of Dar es Salaam, somebody is based at, I don't know, the University of New York, and all of us are requested to review your paper. And we provide our feedback from where we're sitting. We provide our feedback, and based on our feedback and what we understand the journal to be wanting, their scope, and we decide that, okay, no, this paper, it's going to be rejected. So then it gets rejected, right? So these are people outside of the journal house that are out there, that are reviewers, that are then reviewing the work based on their own expertise, their own expectations, their understanding of what the work should look like. And in that case, unfortunately, the journals don't really have power. They rely on these reviewers, and they rely on the expertise of these reviewers, and therefore they have to take seriously what these reviewers are saying, much as they're taking what you are also saying seriously, and they're trusting you to review, and they're even coming back to you to review again. And that's how that works. However, if it's a desk rejection, as I've said, please have a conversation with the editors. Actually, have a conversation with the editors, even if it came from the reviewers. Sit with the journal editor, write them an email, ask to have a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting, and have a conversation about this concern that you have, and explain to them and ask them, but how can the two not go together? That I can be trusted to be a reviewer, but on the other hand, my work does not deemed to be good enough and it gets rejected. And then have a conversation, hear what they say, and then take it from there, because it could be a myriad of things. What I offer now are really just some possibilities in terms of what the reasons could be. By all means, or by no means do I know what the reason could be. I'm just saying it based on the experience that I have, and also just based on how journals function. And then that's just a broad, overview of what the issue could be. But from what I'm reading here, I think you need a more detailed response and understanding in terms of what the issues could be. Because if you don't, you might run the risk of continuous rejection, because who knows, maybe you're repeating the same mistake without knowing, because you have not received feedback that assists you to be able to know exactly where or what the issue is, so that you can attend to it. And next time when you submit, then that's hopefully not an issue anymore. Okay. All right. You're struggling to write a review paper. Review, and what are you reviewing? Are you reviewing literature, or are you reviewing somebody's work? So again, unless if this is the person who was asking about a conceptual paper, so you're doing a review paper, maybe as a conceptual paper, not based on data, on literature, then I guess my initial response would still apply as well. And you're saying well answered, so I'm going to then assume that you're okay. And if you're okay, I'm also okay. Singobile, I don't know. There isn't, as far as I know, any consensus or any requirement when it comes to acceptable impact factor, except the impact factor just determines the quality of the journal that you are publishing. And so Singobile is asking, what is the acceptable impact factor of a journal? So the journal can be 1.3, or a journal can be 5.7. And as you saw with the high impact journals, it can even be 30 when it comes to impact factor. But what is important is whether that journal is deemed as a legitimate journal, a journal that is accredited, because accreditation also speaks to the quality and frequency and all the ticks that are required for a journal to be deemed as producing good work and publishing good work and following proper procedures. But in terms of saying, okay, if a journal is 1.2, then it's not acceptable. Or if a journal is, 0.9, then it's not acceptable. I have not come across where that has been an issue in terms of saying it must be at least this impact factor for it to be acceptable. I have not come across that. I will look into it and check what is deemed as acceptable impact factor. Not that that impact factor will then determine whether that journal is okay for you to publish in or not. But in terms of saying, okay, when we're saying really standard quality, this is what the impact factor is. There are some journals that are not ranked in that way, but they are still of good quality. So the impact factor, or journals that are indexed, are not all the journals that exist. Please, we must also remember that as well. The same as accredited journals. Not all the non-accredited journals are not good journals, right? That's also something to also take into consideration as well. There are internationally recognized journals, high reputation journals, but those journals are not in the accredited list. So that's also another thing to consider. And I think something worth mentioning as well is that the accreditation list is it's a uniquely South African system. So if you are based in Nigeria, that might not necessarily apply to you in terms of the benefit that it comes with, except if you are, as you are right now, a UNISA student. For this particular article for your master's, or for these 2 particular articles that you're going to publish in that are required, it has to be journals that are accredited. Okay, but then going forward, you may publish in any other journal that you want that is a reputable journal, either nationally, regionally, or internationally. It does not have to be in the DHET list. So if you're sitting at the University of Ghana in Accra, that might not have meaning in a sense, or in the same way that it would have meaning for me sitting in South Africa in a South African institution. Okay, I hope that makes sense. However, it is important and it is a requirement for you as a student. South Africa uses it as a marker for quality, but over and above that, it also uses it as part of the subsidy that universities get, funding that university gets for them to be able to be sustainable and to be able to survive, right? So it's only for South African funding in that sense. Whereas maybe in other institutions outside of South Africa, the funding model of the governments in terms of supporting universities would be very different, right? So that's how these would work. And the same is Ngobile when it comes to impact factors as well. That impact factors are useful, they're important because it's about citations, and it's about how that then speaks to the quality of the work, because ideally we would not cite something if it does not have appeal and is not based on rigorous work. And therefore that's what the impact factors are for. The higher the impact factor, the better. But does it mean if the impact factor is very low, it won't count? That's something that is debatable, because what is very low? 5 or 3 or 1.2. So that's another issue as well. All right. For many other journals, because only a few, I think less than 5, would be beyond 30. So a 6 or a 12 or a 14 would be deemed as a very, very, very good journal. There are journals that I know impact factor is like 3.5, and that's deemed as very, very good. Again, it's regional. It's also global, and depending where you are based, that picture might also look different as well, because we're looking at local journals and their impact factor, looking at journals that are based outside of the region or outside of the continent, and then the marker that would also be different as well. Who are you being judged against is also very critical. Okay, thank you. For literature review, what do reviewers mean when they ask you to separate refs from the studies used in the review? What do reviewers mean when they ask you to separate references from the studies used in the review? Okay. I'm trying to understand. Okay, so when you're doing a literature review, again, there are different ways one would do it. You're doing a literature review focusing on a phenomenon, right? And then you're looking at literature that deals with that phenomenon, and then you review the literature looking at the different ways in which different scholars have attended to that issue and how they've engaged it. Or it can be a literature review that is also based on the time frame. So you're looking at literature review on a particular issue in the past 10 years. So what has been written about this issue in the past 10 years? What has been written about this issue in the past 30 years? What has been written about this issue between 1980 and 1994? And there's always a reason why you're looking at a particular time frame, which is something that you will speak to, that you will elaborate on. So in that case, or in that sense, you're going to be drawing on literature between 1980 and 1994, right? So that's the review that you're doing. But over and above that, you're also going to use other references or other people that maybe you want to draw from to make a particular point or a particular issue in the literature that you're doing. So in this case, it would mean, so when they say separate references from the studies that you use, so the studies that are conducted in 1980 and 1994, maybe at the height of HIV, right? So what have scholars said about HIV in 1980 and 1994, and how has this changed, and what differences did we see over time? So these are the studies that you're looking at. They did a study on HIV in 1980. This was the focus. This is what they were looking at. Were the issues around ARVs or not? Were they starting then? And then in 1986, the studies that were conducted focusing on a similar phenomenon look different from those ones that were done in 1980. So you're doing that comparison, or you're looking at the build-up in terms of how things changed over time and how the focus of the studies around issues on HIV also changed over time as a result of new developments, scientific revolution, and all of that over time in terms of the responses to HIV, right? So those are the studies that you're using in your review. But over and above that, you're also doing literature generally around issues on HIV that you're using also to support, to build on, to draw from. But then you're looking at maybe these 5 studies, and these 5 studies are what you're using for your review. And so in 1980, there was a study Then in 1983, there was also this study. In 1987, there was this study and that study and that study. So you're doing a review of the studies that were conducted on HIV and AIDS, right? So that's what you're reviewing, those studies. But then over and above those studies, you're then looking again, because that's now your research, right? Those studies, the analysis of those studies, the review of those studies, that's your research. But then with this research, you're also then doing a literature review, if you will, over and above that. That then builds on, that adds on, that shows, that engages, right? And then I guess then the reviewers want to see where the literature review outside of those studies are, and then where the review of the studies themselves are as well. Anonymous, does that answer you? And did I understand your question correctly? I guess that's also my question as well. Can other SRLs be used as sources for the writing? Yes, I guess that's what I was answering right now, that you can use others as sources for the writing of the review that you're doing. Does that make sense? If it doesn't, you let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to assume that you understand, right? I think in answering the first part, I then spoke to the second part as well, that you then draw from other people that have written on HIV to then be able to engage with the specific studies that you are reviewing that are focusing on HIV. Okay? All right. Any more questions? Not seeing. Okay, anonymous. Okay. All right, I'm not seeing any more questions. So I'm going to assume that we are okay then. And then I'm not seeing also follow-ups. And without the follow-up, I'm also going to assume that it's clear. Okay. And again, if it's not clear, and if after the session something comes up, by all means, drop me an email. If you do not want to wait for the next session, you're more than welcome to drop me an email. I prefer doing it in the session here because then other people can also get to hear the answer, because sometimes your question helps another student as well. But if we do it outside of the session, it will answer you, but then maybe another student will not benefit. Or another student might ask the same question again that I would have already answered. But having said that, I do welcome questions outside of the session if you do have them. And then if I think it's something that others can also benefit from, I will then bring it to the session as well, okay? And engage it in one of the question and answer sessions that we're going to have in the near future. All right. Okay, Anonymous, I see the thumbs up. I think we're going to stop here then for tonight. And I want to thank you for all the questions and the engagements that you had, that we had tonight. And I look forward to seeing all of you in our next session. Enjoy the rest of your evening, the rest of your afternoon, the rest of your day, wherever you are in the world. And thank you so much for attending the session tonight. Okay, everybody, goodbye.